GPS News, news for exactly where you are. I'm your host, Eric King.
And I'm Daryl Geddes, and these are some of the top stories for this week.
We have some very important news regarding the stock market's negative reaction to a strong jobs report this week, and a fun story out of the Northeast about a winter tradition that's still going strong.
And as always, we have some helpful advice for you in our Health Minute, a quick peek into what's trending around the world as far as social media is concerned, and we'll wrap everything up with a special Super Bowl edition of This Week in History.
U.S. stocks fell sharply on Friday after a stronger than expected jobs report sent interest rates higher. The Dow Jones Industrial Average dropped 666 points to close at 25,520, capping off the index's sixth largest decline ever. What's the Dow Jones Industrial Average, you may ask out there? It's an index that kind of shows the 30 largest publicly owned companies in the United States and how they've traded during a standard trading session during the stock market. So in layman's terms, how are the big boys doing? So that's the index we're talking about, and it posted its worst day since June 2016. But you may say, how can a stronger than normal jobs report make investors nervous? Isn't that a good thing? Well, for the everyday person like you and me, hearing that the U.S. economy added 200,000 jobs in January and that wages rose 2.9% would seem like a good thing for everybody, right? Again, looks can be deceiving because not necessarily. The economy, aka our wallets, as that increases and we start doing better, the interest rates that the Federal Reserve will allow, those start to rise. And even a rise, a small percentage point in interest rates when you're dealing with trillions of dollars, that spells out bad news for big time investors and people that are looking down the road in case there was a recession. That really puts them in a bind, even though it seems like it's good for us. Now, what does it mean for you and me? It means that what's good for the goose isn't necessarily good for the gander. We're like a big game of tug of war between what's good for our pockets and the here and now, and what's good for our retirement savings down the road, the options that our federal government will have to relieve us if there's ever any recessions or an economic turndown, which of course we know is always a possibility. So something's got to give, but at the end of the day, it's not a matter of if, but when.
You know what time it is. It's time for your Health Minute. Today we're going to be talking about 3 natural ways to look younger. First, we're going to look at exercise. Exercise prevents gray hairs as it reduces stress. It also prevents free radical damage, which is one of the main things that causes you to look older. Second, we're going to look at intermittent fasting. This actually naturally increases your HGH, otherwise known as human growth hormone, which amps up the production of collagen for younger looking skin. It also tells the cells in your body to repair themselves to make a newer, much healthier cell to prevent aging. Lastly, we're going to look at having more sex. That's right, having more sex. Having sex at least 3 times a week can make you look up to 10 years younger. Remember, it has been proven that having more sex can help you live longer. That's it. That's all I got. Yeah.
Now for a bit of fun out of the Northeast. I know many of you have heard of Groundhog Day, especially if you're a fan of Bill Murray and the 1993 comedy by the same name, but you probably really don't know much about it if you haven't given much thought otherwise. But to keep it simple, there's a tradition every year where a high-profile animal belonging to the squirrel family called the groundhogs, they're turned into a novelty weathermen, so to speak, who emerge from their winter burrows to tell us exactly how long winter will be. So now the legend, the myth, whatever you want to call it is, now if they come out of their burrow and they see their shadow and then they go back into their burrow, that means that there's going to be 6 more weeks of winter. However, if they don't see their shadow and they come out, then spring is just around the corner. No pressure, right? But we did have a little controversy going on this year because we had some conflicting reports. And a report out of Reuters entitled "Groundhog Phil predicts more cold weather. Chuck says spring is coming." Who's Phil, you say? Phil is a weather forecasting groundhog out of Pennsylvania who on Friday emerged from his burrow, saw his shadow, and went back in. And so, therefore, according to his prediction, 6 more weeks of winter. Despite his rival Staten Island, New York, groundhog saying that spring is coming, he came out and said, no, sir, spring is just around the corner. Now you can imagine after Phil's prediction was delivered at 7:20 Eastern time, it was met with a whole bunch of mix of groans and jeers and things like that as the thousands came out Friday to see what the rodent had in store for them, just 80 miles outside of Pittsburgh. But again, Chuck, on the other hand, our New York groundhog, he came outside, didn't see his shadow, and said, hey man, the coast is clear, and instead predicted an early spring. Now, seeing as we endured record-breaking freezing temperatures, especially here in Minnesota, and as unusually powerful, winter storms called bomb cyclones have, hit us, I think it's safe to say that although we've got a lot of love for Phil over there in Pennsylvania, we're all on Team Chuck right now.
Today we're going to talk about suicide, and suicide rates are actually on the rise. The suicide rate has risen by quarter to 13 per 100,000 people in 2014, 10.5 per 100,000 in 1999. It's not just confined to one age group, one race, or one gender. However, the younger generation, ages 10 to 16, have been experiencing the largest percentage of increase, tripling over 15 years from 0.5 to 1.7 per 100,000 people. If you're wondering if someone around you is a candidate for suicide, some of the warning signs include, but are not limited to, if they're depressed or in depression, anxiety, irritability, agitation, or rage. If in their speech they're talking about killing themselves, feeling hopeless, having no reason to live, being a burden to others, feeling trapped or in unbearable pain. If you're noticing these symptoms, do not leave that person alone. Remove any firearms, alcohol, drugs, or sharp objects that could be used in order to facilitate a suicide attempt. Also, please call the U.S. National Suicide Prevention Lifeline at 1-800-273-TALK. That's 1-800-273-8255. And take the person to an emergency room or seek help from a medical or mental health professional.
We have a very special edition of This Week in History, our Super Bowl edition, because as many of you can guess from our background, if you don't know us, we're broadcasting here in Minneapolis, Minnesota, the site of this year's big game.
30 years ago, this week, on January 31st, 1988, in San Diego, California, Doug Williams of the Washington Redskins became the first African-American quarterback to play in a Super Bowl, scoring 4 of Washington's 5 touchdowns in an upset 42-10 victory over John Elway's Denver Broncos in Super Bowl 22.
30 years ago, long time ago, but it affects us today, definitely. Denver was favored in the game to win, and it started off very strong as star quarterback John Elway, we all kind of know him, threw for 56-yard touchdown on the team's very first play from scrimmage. So started off, it wasn't looking pretty good for him, but
by the beginning of the second quarter, the Broncos were ahead 10-0. All that changed, however, when Williams and the Redskins began to obliterate the Denver defense, scoring 35 points in the quarter, the most points ever for any single postseason quarter in NFL history.
And Denver never recovered. This, of course, went down as one of the many Super Bowl losses for John Elway before he finally got his. But as the Redskins scored once more in the second half to put the final score at 42-10. Though he downplayed the race issue of his legacy after the game, telling ABC's Keith Jackson in the post-game interview that he didn't come to the Washington Redskins as a black quarterback. He just came as a quarterback. Williams made history in more than one way on that day for Super Bowl 22.
His 4 touchdowns in the first half tied the Super Bowl record for most touchdowns thrown in an entire game. Also, in the first half, he passed for 306 yards, just 25 short of the Super Bowl record for the entire game.
Now, we may take it for granted to see people like Donovan McNabb, Colin Kaepernick, Russell Wilson, Cam Newton, among others, in the Super Bowl leading their teams out there. But without Doug Williams' win 30 years ago, they may have never really got the shot to be taken serious as potential Super Bowl winning and franchise quarterbacks that they are today. So thank you, Doug Williams, and this has been this week's very special Super Bowl edition of This Week in History. It's about that time again, everyone's favorite time of the day, the word of the day.
Yeah.
And the word of the day is?
Moxie. What does moxie mean, you might be asking?
Right.
Moxie means, it's an adjective, and it means courage, nerve, or determination.
The moxie, the nerve, the gall of people sometimes. No, but you got to have a little bit of moxie to get anything done. You got to have some determination. You got to have some nerve to keep whatever you're doing going, So from all of us here at GPS News, we thank you for tuning in again this week with us. And as always, let your heart not be troubled.
Neither let it be afraid.